Hello, and welcome to this presentation on key areas of analysis impacting marital standard of living reports. My name is Karen D. Sparks. I am a CDFA, and I am the owner and founder of Divorce Financial Strategists. In this presentation, we're going to be covering topics that intersect with the preparation of marital standard of living reports as a part of client engagement. The topics that we're going to be covering in this presentation include purpose, and we're going to be going over 3 prongs underneath that, which will cover what the report is, when you're going to be preparing it, and why. And then we're going to follow that discussion with topics involved in the preparation of the marital standard of living report, focusing on content, and in that context, we're going to be reviewing acquiring the data, organizing the data, and then analyzing the data. We will then move into a discussion of the physical appearance of your report and some directions and observations regarding the aesthetic value and the tone of your written product. Finally, I'm going to be sharing some additional tips and recommendations that can help with the overall preparation and approach that you should take when you're preparing marital standard of living reports. So let's get started on our first topic in this area, and we're going to start with purpose. Foundationally, when you're approaching the task of preparing a marital standard of living report, it's necessary to understand exactly what is the definition that surrounds this subject area. The definition that you see here on the screen is the one that's generally accepted in the industry. It may be slightly different depending on the jurisdiction in which you're practicing, but in general, the definition to be applied to marital standard of living is a lifestyle enjoyed by the parties during the marriage. I want to draw your attention to the word lifestyle in this definition because that is actually the key component of the mindset that you need to have in preparing these reports. I like to frame the term lifestyle as the combination of income, expenses, and activities that contribute to the maintenance of the family operation. To that end, we're going to take a look at some areas that I have developed and also have seen in my practice that sort of encompass main sections of information. The first of those that contribute to the marital standard of living is any costs that are spent for schooling. In particular, we're focusing on the minor children. So we want to look at any costs that might be involved for private school, any tutoring, or any other third-party support for learning disabilities or other disabilities. The second category that I found useful in applying is that of housing. Here you want to, of course, look at the primary marital residence and any debt service on that. You'll want to identify if there are any vacation homes or any other investment property that the parties may be holding. This third category is shopping, and admittedly that is a very broad category, but I refer to it and use it to not only encompass the basic costs for living, such as food, clothing, improvements to the home, etc., but any other miscellaneous costs that are relational to your particular client set, athletics, camps, school fees, etc., all those types of things I sort of put under this broad umbrella because sometimes they interconnect and they interlink. So I tend to categorize them there. Finally, I take a look at how the family spends their free time away together. You want to look at the frequency of those outings and pay some attention to the cost and how that relates to the income that's coming into the family. Finally, the last area would be dining out and entertainment. And here you can put expenses, obviously, for restaurant eating and eating that's going on outside the home. And in here, you can feel free to incorporate entertainment expenses such as plays, concerts, and any other miscellaneous gatherings that the family may do. And of course, if your client engagement includes other areas that are tangential to this or related, please feel free to use them. I cited these 5 here because they are just a very good way of looking at the lifestyle picture and being able to segment out certain areas of activity. Now let's move to the second prong on the subject of purpose in relation to the marital standard of living report. And let's talk about when you would actually be engaged to do so. I found that engagement in this area circles around 3 main events. The first being acting in the capacity of a retained expert. You would normally be involved in this type of engagement when the couple has stipulated to you as the financial neutral designated to prepare the report. When they are stipulating to your services in this area, they're agreeing to use your report for a variety of purposes, but most notably, you should be prepared to validate and defend this report if you are called into deposition, or further on in the proceedings, if the issue of permanent spousal support or other issues of the dissolution go to trial, you should be prepared to act in the capacity of a witness and be prepared to be cross-examined not only by opposing counsel, but to take questions from the judge on the bench in your capacity as a witness. So that would be the first type of experience that you might have. The second experience could simply come as a part of your retention engagement with the client. This situation often happens when the parties are perhaps engaging in mediation or a collaborative process. They have worked through the allocation of various marital assets, and now they're really getting down to the process of figuring out what the support is going to look like for the spouse that's going to receive it. In this respect, clients may request of you to give them a baseline number to analyze their lifestyle and their marital standard of living so that they have a starting off point for the continuation of negotiations. They could request you to do this simply in an informal sense, in where you're generally discussing numbers and their application, or they could, in fact, request you to prepare a formal document that they're going to use. Finally, as a CDFA or divorce finance professional, you could find yourself preparing this report as a counterpoint or a counter-analysis for another financial expert's report. I actually had this happen to me in an engagement last year, and so I'm going to use that experience as an example to explain how this would actually work. In the case that I'm speaking about with my client last year, the parties did in fact stipulate to an independent neutral to prepare their marital standard of living report. After that report was submitted and reviewed, my client, who was the husband, was very dissatisfied with the end product. He did not feel that the report included significant transitions in his income prior to the date of separation. He felt that it mischaracterized certain aspects of the family's lifestyle, and in general, he did not feel that it produced the type of information that would then lead to an adequate permanent spousal support analysis and number for his wife. Thus, he retained me to do 2 things, and these are 2 of the things that you might find that you're going to be asked to do as well. So number 1, I needed to review the sitting report, the current report that was in question, and consider his concerns and identify any that he did not view. Secondly, I was required to produce an additional report that counterbalanced the first one, brought in my client's concerns, and then I also took a step further to bring in other analysis that I felt came to bear on the party situation in that case. So that can be quite an interesting piece of work to do, but it also allows you to kind of dig deeper and provide additional analysis that was not present in the first place. So that was a very good experience, and I enjoyed that very much. The third prong on our subject of purpose is why. Why would you be doing this report? What is the reason why clients are requesting and their counsel are requesting this type of work? In order to answer that question, you need to understand that these reports are most generally used to develop that baseline for permanent spousal support. And as I was stating in the previous example, when parties get to a point where assets have been delineated and taken care of, this is usually one or two of the last steps that will occur. And because that is the case, it is very important to take a look at a stream of activity prior to the date of separation. I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but 3 to 5 years prior to the date of separation in order to establish a baseline for those payments going forward. And I'm also going to be talking a little later about some events that could impact that number to a lesser amount. The second situation in which you would be preparing a marital standard of living report is, in fact, to validate temporary spousal support payments. In a normal dissolution action in which there is a low wage earning or non-wage earning spouse, very soon after the dissolution proceeding is begun, a process starts in order to provide support to that spouse. The number that is derived for that support is usually calculated through software. The court systems here in the state of California use a particular software for that purpose, and they impute certain information such as income for both parties, tax ramifications, child support, etc. At the end of that process, a number is produced, and that number is generally applied for temporary spousal support. So a marital standard of living report could impact that number when the pieces of information that went in to develop the temporary spousal support number missed some issues. It may have missed bonus issues or other income stream issues, in which case the temporary spousal support number should probably be larger, and there might be some court proceedings to make that adjustment. So you want to make sure that you're looking actually at the temporary support also as a validation moment for this type of report. Now we want to move into the actual content of a marital standard of living report. When we're looking at content, we're going to be doing this in a 3-step process. The first of which is going to be a discussion on acquiring the data from the client. Then we will move into how that data is actually organized so that you can move through it and make the necessary analysis. Finally, in step 3, we're going to go into a discussion on what's involved in actually analyzing the data once you've acquired it and once you have organized it. When I begin a client engagement involving preparation of a marital standard of living report, I've developed a process of where I divide my documents up into 3 main areas. And as you can see here on the screen, I have core documents, I have documents that reference liability, and documents that refer to assets. And I want to start by going over some of the documents that I have included in my list of core documents. I refer to them as core because a lot of these documents are very essential and they're foundational to the beginning of my analysis. The first one is the divorce petition and any other initial filing documents. This gives me a broad framework for just general, basic statistical information, dates of birth, date of marriage, date of separation, some preliminary income information, and so forth. So that kind of lays the groundwork for what I'm dealing with and some basic information on the parties. The next core document that I feel it's appropriate to review is the income and expense declaration. In the state of California, this document, together with an asset declaration document, are actual court forms. But if this is not the case in the jurisdiction where you're practicing, I think it's essential to develop some sort of process for acquiring this information from both clients. So whether it's a template that you're using, it's a very detailed form that you're using, it is very important to obtain this information on income from the parties and all the income categories, and then have a separate listing of the expenses incurred by both parties, and have that information available to you and set out, and make sure that information is as inclusive as possible. The third set of documents I incorporate into my practice and use regularly, and those are credit reports. Credit reports are very essential for validating any of the other financial information that you're going to be gathering from the parties and their counsel. Very often, credit reports will include information that may be missing from that documentation. It may include information that the parties actually forgot about. Or more importantly, it may include information that either one or both of the parties were not even aware of. So this becomes a very important document of exploration and discovery, and it can serve to bring some issues to light that need to be on the table, not only for your analysis, but for additional analysis that the parties may need to do. Tax returns and any other employment-related documents are also very key documents. They are a wealth of information regarding the financial income in the family. The rule of thumb is to require 3 to 5 years pre-data separation for these documents. The reason being is this has generally become a very good sense of a frame of reference and the ebb and flow, possibly, of income in the marriage. There could have been bonuses, good years, bad years, other events that are somehow taking place within the family that have affected income. And tax returns are a good way of looking at that, as well as cross-referencing with other investment income that I'm going to talk about in a minute to see how the tax treatment happens with that. So you want to take a look at that to get that historical perspective that you need. Bank statements provide another view into the party's lifestyle. You're able to see how the accounts are managed on a monthly basis, and you'll want to use the same time frame that you're using for tax returns, that is 3 to 5 years before the date of separation. Bank statements also help you to see some additional data that I found interesting in my practice. Oftentimes, the party who initiates the divorce proceedings has been thinking about it for a while. Because of that, during that period of thinking and rethinking, I have seen situations where money has started to be moved out of accounts into other vehicles and so forth, and a good thorough review of bank statements may act as a flag to that if you see accounts dropping just for no reason and there's no other connection to any cost or any other events that you can think of or that actually makes sense for this particular client situation. The second set of documents that are critical to pull together are what I've labeled the liability documents. First, you want to take a look at any loan activity. If the couple has minor children or children who are older and are approaching decisions about attending university or post-secondary education, you want to take a look at student loan activity and commitments for that, what that's costing, what the duration is. Certainly, if either one or both of the parties have taken out any type of unsecured or secured loan, you want to take a look at what that means, what the payout on that is, what the duration of it is it a short-term, long-term, and any other effects that that loan process may have. Regarding the real property, you'll want to request documents dealing with home equity loans or any other type of loan taken out against the real property. Again, you want to have sort of the same mindset in looking at how much is involved in that, when is a loan due to be paid off, interest rate, and other important details that may be on that equity loan documentation. Credit cards also evidence liability, but give you a good opportunity to see that actually sectioned off into various categories, somewhat similar to some of the ones I've mentioned earlier in looking at lifestyle. Some credit card companies do an excellent job of breaking down spending categories. So this is actually almost a pre-organization piece for you as a CDFA or divorced financial professional, because it sort of does a little bit of your work for you in categorizing some of those expenses. For some of your clients who may have significant stock investment portfolios, I have seen in my practice issues of margin loans being used in order to actually finance the family's lifestyle. And essentially, a margin situation occurs in which the families have securities worth a certain dollar amount. They basically take a loan out against the value of those securities. Problems generally arise when you're looking at this paperwork when the party's portfolio actually falls below value for the brokerage firm, and then the individuals are involved in a situation where it's a margin call, and they are having to sell other assets in their portfolio in order to bring that value in line with the requirements of the brokerage firm. So I have had clients use this type of vehicle primarily to really finance their lifestyle. So if this is the case, you'll want to pay attention to that. Finally, mortgage loans on the primary marital residence and any other real property that they have. Again, you'll want to look at what that debt service looks like in terms of duration and interest rate and amount. The third category of documents that I look at are what I call asset documents. In other words, money that are to come in to the marital relationship from a variety of sources. Those can look anything like employee stock option plans or ESOP. A lot of individuals are employed in industries which offer this as a benefit, and if that's the case, you'll want to see the statements on those assets. There's also deferred compensation. This is also a benefit as well, and all of these categories are going to require you to request a requisite documentation that goes with that. Oftentimes, individuals are also receiving trust income from various sources, either family trusts or other trusts that have been set up either before or during the marriage, and income is actually coming in as a result of that. For those individuals who are in employment situations in which options have been used as an incentive, you will come across issues of options that are either vested or non-vested. For the vested options, you want to pay very close attention to when that vesting takes place. Is it post or pre-separation? Because you're going to probably need to allocate that money in some form or fashion as you get deeper into your analysis. And so you'll want to take a look at that. And finally, other types of savings vehicles, such as 401k accounts, IRAs, SEP IRAs, and for individuals who are employed by school districts, state, local, county, or even federal government, you want to look at defined pension benefit plans as relates to those employment sectors. Now that we've talked about the type of documentation that it is important for you to pull together, we want to turn our attention to step 2, which is the actual process of organizing the data that you've now requested and received. To that end, I want to speak about how we as CDFAs and divorce professionals tend to deal with a large amount of paperwork that we receive on a regular basis. There is, of course, the traditional method of creating space in the file cabinet, developing a working file, and taking up a lot of office space with certain client projects and attachments and things of that nature. While that is a traditional method and it does work well if the file is adequately organized, what happens is that it tends to not be efficient. It tends to also take up a lot of space, and more importantly, it increases the risk that documents or copies of documents could be lost or compromised. And so in the discussion of this presentation, I thought it would be important to focus on how technology actually does help us. And it does help us in the form of cloud-based solutions. I use one of these solutions very frequently with the data that I request from client and counsel, and I find that it is a very, very efficient way to practice. To that end, I've highlighted 3 of the more common content solution cloud-based systems that are used. One of them is Box, the other is Dropbox, which I use quite a bit, and the third is actually Google Drive. These cloud-based solutions provide a lot of advantages. The first being there's a central repository where not only you, but the client, counsel, and any third parties that are necessary to this process have an opportunity to review the same database. You can also customize views by only sharing certain files or certain documents with individuals in the process of going through your work on the Marital Standard of Living report in any conference calls or meetings you may have. And finally, it does free you from the confines of actually having to be in your office to actually put your hand on the document that you need or spend copious amounts of time thumbing through documents to try to get to that one piece of paper that you need. It allows you to work remotely if necessary, over Skype, other conference calling mechanisms, and you can be efficient in what you do and go right to what you need. So I encourage you, if you're not utilizing these on a large basis, to investigate them to see if they can be a benefit to what you do. And you will find that the process of using it is very easy. It essentially consists of scanning and uploading, and the process of doing it with all 3 of these mechanisms is very user-friendly and very easy to figure out. Once you are done with the client engagement, you can simply close that client file so that there's no compromising of sensitive data or information. And now we're moving to the third and very important step in this process, which is actually analyzing your data and what actually goes into that process. In this case, I like to frame it in terms of a mathematical equation that actually builds on itself. And it starts with looking at all the lifestyle components that we have discussed and making sure there's an understanding and a relationship with those for your analysis. You then bring into play the earning capacity of each of the parties. And here you want to take a look at what each party is doing, whether they're the high wage earner, the low wage earner, or perhaps they have not worked in a number of years. In this case, you might be well advised to research some areas. For example, if the non or low wage earning spouse actually did some work prior to the marriage in a certain profession or area, in order to complete your analysis on the lifestyle leading to the permanent spousal support number, you might want to do some research on whatever area they were formerly involved in to see whether that's even something that is doable in this instance. If you're looking at the higher wage earning spouse, you want to look at exactly what they do, how much longevity they've had in it, and have there been any interruptions in that earning capacity as they've come through the marriage. The second overlay in this section is composed of three components, the first being age. Age is important in terms of where an individual stands in their career and what their mindset is with it. Will they be making any kind of career change? Is it the type of position or profession that they're not going to be moving from? How long have they been doing it? All of these are variables that you want to bring in to consideration when you're looking at that part of the process. The second issue on this part here is education. If you're looking at one of the spouses who perhaps needs to re-enter the workforce, you want to look at what that educational picture is going to look like as you're going through your analysis for marital standard of living. How much time is it worthwhile to do that as opposed to maybe taking a position that offers on-the-job training and other issues that come to bear on this process? So education is very much key. In today's society, you will always need to consider issues of unemployment. And if you're noticing this as you're going through the time period prior to the date of separation, you want to pay close attention to how long these periods have lasted if they existed. Is it a seasonal situation that's not necessarily connected to the economy, but basically connected to the type of work that is being done? And finally, for high-level executives and professionals, you want to look to issues of reabsorption into the workforce. And when you're looking at reabsorption, you can also connect back again with the subject of age, because depending on how old the individual is and what they do and the area in which they live, all of those components are going to play into the lifestyle analysis, because it has a lot to do with how quickly or whether they will be reabsorbed in their chosen profession. So once you have an understanding of the lifestyle components, you have now included information on earning capacity, age, education, and unemployment. Now you're ready to actually feed into the subject areas and data areas for the marital standards of living report. So now you want to fold in areas regarding temporary spousal support payments, as we spoke about earlier. You want to weave in education costs, housing costs, issues regarding child support and the termination thereof, depending how old the children are. More importantly, as you get deep into your financial formulas and equations in your report, you're going to always want to include a cost of living adjustment so that your numbers are equalized appropriately. In addition to cost of living, you always want to present your information with pre- and post-tax implications for income. And that is where you're going to circle back to some of your other documentation, such as your tax returns and anything else that gives an indication on where that needs to be. Finally, for individuals who are perhaps performing at a high level in their career, perhaps their company has been bought out by another company, you will often see scenarios where there is a severance package, and more importantly, there is a salary severance that is to exist for a certain period of time. And as this relates to the standard of living and permanent spousal support, you're going to want to look at how long those salary payments from severance are going to go on and whether or not support payments can be related to that for any particular duration of time. So when you're looking at the past, analyzing their lifestyle, present issues of earning capacity, and then bringing in all the other threads of the future implications. This is your analysis trajectory for your report, and this is the way that you get to that number that you're actually looking for. Because the end result of all of this process is that you will end up with a gross number for both spouses, husband and wife. and that will probably be a yearly number. You will then want to develop that number further into a monthly figure for both individuals. That then represents the baseline permanent spousal support foundation number that will be the starting point. This is important for you to realize and know because there are some jurisdictions, such as California, that look at spousal and permanent or alimony support in the framework that the person receiving it has an obligation to become self-supporting. So that permanent spousal support number is a baseline that's going to be produced by your report. But as I'm going to be discussing in just a few moments, there are going to be some areas that are probably going to cause that number to be affected downward. And so you'll want to be flexible with it, but you want to make sure that that's the foundational number that you get to. Some additional issues that can impact your analysis are separate property distributions and the rate of return on them. As I was referring to adjustments in your baseline permanent spousal support number, this is one of the things that I was thinking about. Either through assets being allocated as a part of the dissolution process, or items or assets that either, particularly the receiving spouse, has that are considered separate property. Case law has been determining that you can look to some of these assets and the rate of return earned on those assets in order to assess how much income the receiving spouse is going to get from them and adjust the permanent spousal support award accordingly. So you'll actually want to get documentation from either the clients or their attorneys on the settlement process thus far to see what has been allocated to which person and what is the value of that in case the foundational amount needs to be adjusted. Another area that's important to give some attention to are cultural and ethnic issues with your clients. And when this occurs, you want to be very sensitive to what is important to them. Oftentimes in a cultural or ethnic context, there are certain norms, there are certain expectations. And to be honest, there just may be a certain attitude toward divorce and support in general. And so you want to be very respectful and conversant with those issues for the clients for whom that applies so that they know and can feel that you as a finance professional have an understanding of where they sit and what they're saying, and you want to make sure that you hear them. The other issue is early retirement. Look to the age of your client, again, circling back to one of those areas that plays into your analysis. You look at age to see how long potentially will the payor spouse be working. If they're very close to retirement, this has several implications for how the permanent spousal support award should be put together. There might be instances in which there's a spousal buyout and offset against other assets. There may be a tiered step down that may be applied to the situation. So looking at early retirement brings to bear many other issues. And if it's not looked at properly, the issue for the couple will be that there could be continuous court appearances on modifications pending retirement because the payor spouse is not going to be able to afford the amount of money that was originally set in the order. So you want to make sure that you're including this as a part of your analysis so that people are able to have a light looking forward to what could be expected. And again, circling back on the abilities of one spouse versus another, you do want to take a look at education and professional development disparity and look at research in that area, look at possibilities for things to be done, and look at timing and duration of necessary things that will need to be done and steps that will need to be taken to bring that spouse to an area where they can actually begin receiving and making income. So just in review, in dealing with content and the preparation of your report, You'll want to make sure that you're getting the right documentation. You then want to employ processes that make it efficient and very focused for you to come through all of that data. And then finally, you want to make sure that you are applying best practices and very detailed work in analyzing the data that you have received, in analyzing, the data that you have received. So now I think it's important to turn to an area under preparation which really relates to what does your report look like? Once you've taken steps 1, 2, and 3 and compiled all this information, what does your actual work product look like? This step is really important because your marital standards of living report is a marketing piece. It is your work product. It is you. It also potentially lands in the hands of a variety of professionals connected with the dissolution action, from the clients themselves to their counsel to third-party providers, and enter in the court system. It could be admitted as an exhibit during litigation issues, and it could be used by the judge to ask you questions on the stand, and you could be cross-examined by counsel for it. So the physical presentation of your report is very important. To that end, we're going to go through a couple of examples to sort of identify the things that would be appropriate for you not to do in this context and for you to consider doing in another context. And we do have a color code to how we're going to go through those slides. So the information that you're going to see highlighted in black, we're going to be focusing on font and issues connected with that. When you see items highlighted in pink, we're going to be dealing with spacing and the adequate use of white space on a page. Thirdly, items highlighted in green, we're going to be talking about any tables or graphs that you might be including in your work and talk about proper placement of those. And finally, I will wrap this up with a few comments on tone in your document. So let's take a look at an example that sets out some practices that you might really want to avoid. So now you can see in the heading here and also in the graph that we basically have 4 or 5 different fonts represented. Times New Roman, Gilsam 14, we have 2 different versions of Calibri from the heading to the chart. And you actually want to avoid mixing and matching fonts like this. You want to make sure that your fonts are actually consistent throughout the document. It makes for better flow and better presentation overall. Emphasis like bolding and underlining can be done on a case-needed basis or as you see fit. But you really do not, and you want to avoid going back and forth between font styles and font sizes. Additionally, you want to stay away from just ongoing content, from heading to text, from heading to text. You want to make sure you have adequate spacing, give a break for the reader to actually absorb and read what you have so that they don't get tired. Thirdly, if you're including graphs or any other data in this format, you'll want to look at the positioning of it. In the English language, we read normally from left to right, and that's the flow of how our eyes move. When you position information in the middle of text like this, you essentially split the document in half and break the reading. You break the eye for reading. Even though you may be referring to something directly next to it, so you see we have underlined here, figures and charts. So because you have that mention there, you might think it's a good idea to put the chart next to it, but in fact it is not, because it is very disjointed to try to look from the chart to that and back and forth. And so it kind of takes away from the effect that you actually want to have by your information being displayed. So you'll want to probably look to different placement of that chart, and we're going to look to that right now as we move to a better example of how you might want to set up your text in your document. So first and foremost, you see that we've fixed the font issue. So we're using one uniform font here, Times New Roman. It's set out nicely. There's no different variations in it, and it is very pleasing and easy for the eye to take in. The second thing that you see that has been done here is spacing has been employed between the heading and the actual text. This gives the reader a break. It positions text much more conveniently on the page and just simply makes it easier to read. Finally, you'll notice that the graph has moved to a different location in this example. And a graph following your text is sometimes a better way to go because it allows the reader to come through, to read what you have to say, to then have that graph relate back to what you were talking about. And it doesn't break up the reading. It makes it easier to refer back, and it just creates a more pleasing experience overall. So those are a couple of examples of how you might want to consider putting your document together. Certainly, you may have your own style of how you do it, and that's fine. It's just important to remember that there's certain consistency and relevancy that you want your document to have. You want your document to be user-friendly, and after you have spent the time to come through all your analysis and your work, by all means, you want everyone to be engaged with what you said and not have a tendency to have their mind wander or to start flipping elsewhere because they're just simply tired of reading page after page of text that's not placed well and positioned well. Additionally, you want to look at perhaps having some sort of table or directional document at the front to let people know where they can find certain information in your report really quickly. Final comments on layout have to do with tone. Make sure that your mnemonics or any abbreviations that you're using are explained very well. Do not assume that your reading audience is familiar with terms of art. Make sure that it is readable, accessible, and relatable. Make sure someone can understand it, most importantly, and make sure that they can follow what you are saying from point to point and from analysis to analysis so that each point that you make relates to something else, which then leads to something else, and there's a logical progression. Now I want to go over some additional tips that may also relate to how your report is prepared and what your process actually is. One of the things that you want to make sure that you do is consider maybe offering suggestions at the end of your report on what parties can do based on your analysis. This can be helpful as a starting point or maybe a continuation point in negotiations that are happening and might give the reader a window into some thoughts that maybe hadn't been considered in the past. So it's just kind of a nice idea to maybe add that in conclusion at the end of your report if you feel that that's necessary. The other issue that's very important is to make sure you are familiar with the rules and statutes of the jurisdiction where you practice. Those rules and statutes are going to frame your discussion. They are going to impact how you come through your data and how you analyze your data. So please make sure you're familiar with those. And also, if there are any key court cases that relate to any of the issues that you're discussing, at least make sure you're conversant with those court cases. And again, you're aware of how those court cases could come to bear on your situation. And it helps to just round out your knowledge base and make sure that you're approaching this from the right perspective. Finally, make sure that your computations, all of your math, all of your statistics, all of that is done correctly and you can validate it. Assumptions will be based on what you put in your report, and thus you want to make sure that the mathematical component of that is correct and verifiable. So if you are preparing this report for the first time, or if you're a veteran preparing this type of report, I hope that the information included in here has given you some insight or maybe given you some ideas on what you could do to add to what you are already doing. In that respect, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, related questions on this presentation or in this subject area in general. And my contact information is here on the screen for you, so do not hesitate to contact me if anything comes to mind that needs more clarification or you simply have additional questions. It has certainly been my pleasure to be involved in this presentation today on Marital Standard of Living Reports. I hope you have taken away some knowledge and information that will help you in your future client engagements in this area. Thank you very much.